Welcome to Leadership Matters, a podcast from the Bailey Group. I'm your host, Kaylee Thompson, president of and partner at the Bailey Group, where we believe better leaders create healthier workplace environments, healthier humans, and a better world. On this show, we explore real stories, practical insights, and honest conversations to help you lead yourself and others better. Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in. Welcome to today's episode of Leadership Matters. In today's episode, we have the opportunity to speak with Leigh Bailey, the man, the myth, the legend, and the founder of the Bailey Group. Leigh's known for his over 30 years of experience in the leadership development space, advising over 70 CEOs, working with countless high-level executives, and developing a number of teams across diverse organizations and industries. In today's episode, we talked about the origins of Leigh jumping into the space of leadership development, what propelled him to originally start the Bailey Group, and what he has learned from over 3 decades of operating in the leadership development space. Thanks for joining us. What initially drew you into the world of leadership development and eventually curtailed into a career advising executives and CEOs?
You know, it was a combination of misery and opportunity that kind of came together. I was in like my 5th year of a banking career that felt kind of like I didn't really have much of a direction. And I happened to take a course on effective business presentations. And so we'd get up like 6 times, we'd get videotaped, we'd get feedback on our presenting skills. At the end of the session, the head of training and development at the bank that I was working at the time said, we need somebody who can do sales and sales management training. I wonder if you'd be interested. And I was like, well, I know I'm not happy with what I'm doing right now. It took a little bit of thinking because it was a demotion from the standpoint. I think it was a level 19 and then I was level 15. It was really like starting a new career in some ways. But the thought was, maybe I'd get to know other people in the organization. It can't be worse than what I'm doing right now. And as it turned out, I started to like it, which was interesting. So I started off doing sales and sales management training. Then I got into management development training. And I think what really hooked me was doing, I taught a course called Managing Personal Growth. And which was interesting because, of course, I was trying to manage my own personal growth at the time. But the course was about identifying people's talents and having them identify what their values were and prepare them to go back and have a conversation with their leader about how could they connect their talents and their interests to projects that they had so that the organization would win and the person would win. I thought that was very cool. But then I came to the conclusion over time that trying to do that in a one-day session just wasn't enough to get people to actually make that change. And frankly, that was a pretty foreign concept to most leaders at the time.
Interesting.
So I got interested, but then I thought I should go try and be a banker again. So for like 3 years, I did a whole bunch of different things. I was a private banker, and then I was a manager of retail banking at a downtown Minneapolis office. And then I sold institutional trust services. I was like, I've tried like 10 different banking things. It's just not going to work. And so I finally decided to leave and start a consulting practice focused on coaching and team building because that would be change over time. Again, on the theory that one of 2 things would happen. Either it might work, or if not, at least it forced me out of banking. I'd have to go do something else. It was scary because I was married, had a 4.5-year-old daughter, and I was the sole income provider. But I guess it also says something about change. When what you're doing is not working anymore, sometimes the risk is the better choice.
I'm so glad you touched on that. I'm curious. That had to be a pretty bold move, leaving behind a banking career that you had invested time in. What made that? Tell us more about your why. What made that so compelling that you'd take that risk?
People would often say that. Uh, and what I would say to them was it was not so much courage as it was, uh, what's the word I want to use? Oftentimes, I think big change happens because it's more painful to stay, to keep doing what you're doing than it is to take the risk. Uh, it was certainly scary. I didn't have any savings at the time. So my backup was a second mortgage on my house. Uh, so it was certainly scary, but continuing to do what I was doing was uh, just not an option. And some other option, and again, the idea of a consulting practice was it forces me out of status quo. So I have to do something else. And if this doesn't work, it forces me to figure out something else. So it broke the status quo.
Yeah,
Yeah,
good.
that was the thought.
So tell us about those early days. What did that look like, and how did that shape the next 36 years of building this brand?
It's fascinating how things have changed. I was my first office. It had been interesting because I've been thinking about starting a practice for a number of years, and I went back and looked at some of the visioning I'd done 4 or 5 years ago before I started the practice. And one of the things I talked about was I didn't like working in downtown Minneapolis. It felt uh, soulless to me. So, but one of the things I really wanted was windows. I wanted to have natural light. As it turned out, unconsciously, but as it turned out, my first office was the living room of a little house in Robbinsdale. That was it had the front window, which was great. So it was not fancy. There were spider webs, and I really didn't invite clients there. So I sat in that office and did a lot of cold calling because I mean one of the things I learned pretty early on was uh, I love doing the work, but if there's no work, there's no opportunity to do that. So there was a lot of uh, trying to build relationships, and that took time, and that again was scary because you didn't know if those relationships were going to shift from, gee, we're having nice coffees once a month to we're actually going to do something. Um, One good thing was that the bank that I had been working with hired contractors to come in and just do basic management development training. And so occasionally they would hire me to do that, which was at least something that I could count on as I was trying to grow the practice. But it was, uh, this was before fax machines. So in order to get a fax machine or to use a fax, I had to walk down the street to a printing company that had a printer and a fax machine that I could use. I pretty quickly figured out that my typing skills weren't going to get me very far. So I had to find a firm that would come and pick up stuff that I wrote, take it away for a couple of days, type it up, bring it back to me, and then I'd proof it. And if it wasn't right, I'd have to send it back to them again. That's when I learned my handwriting was a problem because
Whoops.
people think I write in shorthand. No, it's just my handwriting. But so it was a very different. It was a very you do everything right. You just have to do what you have to do to survive at the time. Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier you loved the work. What did you love about the work? Why do you think this work speaks to you personally so strongly?
You said something to me last week or the week before that really resonated with me. I think I felt my own need to be seen and to be valued, and I had found in my own experience that when people were able to see and value me, um, that's how I was able to grow, and the chance to be able to do that for others was really satisfying. One of the reasons I left banking was because I felt like I needed to do something that made a difference to somebody every day, and I could see that doing that work made a difference. Um, the other thing was one of the things that I didn't like about training and development was I had this really intense awareness that when you got 16 people in a room, you have 16 people with different needs, um, who are different places from a readiness standpoint. And the chance to work one-on-one with somebody to really get to know them and to meet them where they were at was really important. So it was a chance to make a difference. It was a chance to build relationships with people and to actually see the kind of transformation happening, um, to be present in their pain sometimes as they were trying to figure things out, uh, felt meaningful. At the end of the day, I felt like, the world was a better place because I had spent the day doing what I was doing, and that really mattered.
It's really powerful,
Yeah.
especially that one-on-one interaction.
Yeah, it was.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So, how did things continue to unfold? So, early days, you're doing cold calls, you're trying to basically get whatever business can come in so that you're not losing your house or your second mortgage.
Yeah.
How did you go from sort of a founder led entrepreneurial solo practitioner business into building an organization that now has 30 plus team members doing really meaningful work out there?
So when I left banking and started the consulting practice, um, as I said, the idea of doing career development and employee engagement work was sort of core to what I did. So I did a lot of one-on-one career coaching. I designed a course for leaders in an organization called, uh, I can't remember what we called it, but it was basically about coaching folks around how do you connect the organization's needs to the individual's needs to create, we didn't call it engagement at the time, but it was like helping people to grow. I wrote a book called Taking Charge of Your Career, uh, sitting at night in my office in front of the computer. Um, and after about 4 years, I decided I wanted to go back to school and get a master's degree in counseling and organizational psychology because I loved the counseling piece, but I wanted to get some formal training in that because I hadn't had any formal training to that point. Uh, and I wanted to get certified in various assessments, and I wanted to learn more about team building, that sort of thing. And so I got a master's degree in human development. And at the end of that, uh, realized that I wanted to move more towards doing executive coaching, not so much career coaching. Uh, both because uh, I found that interesting and I thought it was compelling to really move into that space. And the other reason was because one of the fundamental differences between career coaching and executive coaching is that in executive coaching, companies pay. There's a limit in terms of the potential for a business when it's individual pay. But I need to find somebody to take over the career practice that I've been doing. And I happened to be a member at the time of, it's called the MCDA, Minnesota Career Development Association, uh, because those are the only folks doing coaching really at the time. And so they were the closest I came to a peer group. And there was somebody by the name of Barb Krantz Taylor. Uh,
Verb.
and we just kind of connected over several meetings. She struck me as somebody who was pretty entrepreneurial. She struck me as somebody who wasn't too academic, even though she was at the University of Minnesota. She was looking for something different.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to figure out a financial arrangement that would work for both of us. And so she was the first hire. And the idea was that she took over the career practice.
Yep.
And I then built the
Fascinating.
executive coaching practice.
Sure.
And we had hired by that time, the driving back and forth to a secretarial service wasn't working. So we'd hired somebody to sort of sit in the front room. Also because by that point we had another office and we needed somebody to kind of be in the waiting room, that sort of thing.
Sure.
And then for a variety of reasons, the biggest one being that I got divorced at a certain point, and my ex-spouse was working in the business. We were big into the Myers-Briggs at the time, and she was the SJ of the business and did a lot of the backroom billing operations, those sorts of things. And when that happened, I realized, yeah, I need somebody else who can do that because I'm not very good at that. I had met Martha Carlson through work at American Express. over time. So Martha and I got together and we chatted, and she was looking for something different. So she became sort of the SJ of the practice, if you will, for those of you who know the Myers-Briggs, the person who was planful and good at building process, building systems, that sort of thing. So Barb and Martha were really the core of the practice. The other thing that happened was originally the practice was a lot about doing individual coaching. And again, there weren't a lot of people doing that 35 years ago, whatever. And so what happened was I started working for organizations. I guess I can mention the name. The first one was Medtronic. Did some coaching, one-on-one coaching, and then they came and said, well, we have 25 people. Can you coach those 25 people? And it became clear to me that that's not a scalable model.
Right.
So then we built our first cohort program, which was a way of combining coaching and training together. And then you could deal with chunks of people in organizations. And that became, again, a wildly popular approach. We did that probably in 15, 20 different organizations. And to do that, we needed contractors who could staff those. And so we had to start looking for people who could do that work. One of the things that you learn as a business owner pretty quickly is you have to be really aware of fixed costs. And having people who you hired and paid a salary to, if they couldn't sell, was not a viable business option. So we needed to find a model where we could have people when we needed them who were aligned with us from a value standpoint, but who weren't employees, if you will. So that's how we started to build that practice over time. And that was transformational in terms of all of a sudden we could, rather than our capacity being limited to how many coaching clients I could see in a day, we could do multiple organizations doing multiple cohort sessions, which was a real growth turning point for the business.
Amazing.
Yeah.
You are one of the most experienced and skilled CEO advisors in the Midwest. Tell us how you broke into that market and what you've learned through advising CEOs over the past 2 decades.
For the first, I don't know, call it 15, 20 years of the practice, we tended to work with mid-level leaders. And what was clear to me was that organizations, if you were working with mid-level leaders, they very rarely give you the opportunity to work with senior-level leaders because they kind of had you set in a particular market that you were working in.
Sure.
And so after my master's degree, I continued to do work sort of more in the middle market. But as I continued to build relationships with HR folks, occasionally an opportunity might come along where somebody would say, gee, we're interviewing 3 or 4 people to be a CEO coach. And one of the opportunities that came along was to coach a new leader at what was then RBC Dane Rauscher that had recently been purchased by Royal Bank of Canada. They had a new CEO who had just come down here from Canada and was looking for a coach. And the HR person happened to call me and say, well, you're one of 3 that he wants to talk to.
Wow.
So so I went and talked to him. I have to say it was one of the more intimidating CEO offices I was ever in. So this CEO, and it was the office that he inherited. So the CEO's desk was on a pedestal. So you'd have to look up to talk to him. There were no chairs. There were, I guess you'd call them puffers. So if you can picture executives sitting on puffers,
Oh my God.
looking up like 3 steps to the CEO who's behind, it was like, oh my gosh.
And this was your first CEO?
This was my first CEO client.
Wow.
And it was a real learning experience. He was there for a couple of years. He was not well loved by the people in the organization because they were acquired. And actually, he eventually got fired. And so I coached him for free for a number of months as he was making the job transition.
Wow.
You can probably guess who I'm talking about. He ended up at a firm in Ottawa that became one of the Bailey Group's longest
clients.
tenured clients, and we started to build this model where we coach the CEO. Inevitably, if you're coaching a CEO, you start to work with the executive team doing team development, and then uh, individual members of the executive team who liked that experience would want coaches themselves. And I couldn't coach both the CEO and the direct reports. There's a conflict. So then we'd have other coaches coaching the direct reports. Um, and as HR people got to know that that was work that I did working with CEOs, and particularly new CEOs. I did a lot of work, or I've done a lot of work with first-time CEOs going into organizations. Uh, and there aren't a lot of people who have that experience. So that became sort of a specialty, if you will. I think I've probably coached, I counted the one time, somewhere between 70 and 80 CEOs over the last 10 years in organizations as large as $7-8 billion to organizations that were $15 to $20 million in revenues. Um, and it's one of the things that's fascinating is, and I think this is one of the things that's kept me interested in this work is, so it's not just one industry, right? So there's financial services and there's banking and there's construction and there's manufacturing and there's healthcare and there's insurance. And in order to be really helpful, you have to learn enough about those businesses that you get the language that they talk about, you get the strategic issues that they're dealing with, you get the business environment they're operating in. So the learning was constant, which is part of what made it for me so fascinating, or makes it for me so fascinating.
Amazing.
Yeah.
What would you say is something maybe people don't understand about leadership until they're in those leadership roles?
I think a couple things. I think one of the biggest things is most leaders become CEOs because they were really smart in some sort of a function that they led, whether it was finance or sales or whatever it happens to be. Uh, and the step from being a functional leader um, to now being the CEO who doesn't have a function um, is a really big shift. And I would say that one of the really interesting things to me is the challenge to a person's identity, that is, because people tend to identify with, gee, my value to the organization is I'm delivering a profit every year through my function, or because I'm really smart. And when people need to know something, they come to me.
Mhm.
All of a sudden, I'm not running something that closely anymore, and I don't know all the answers anymore. And so then the question becomes, what's my value? So that's a big one, to figure out, what does it really mean to be a CEO? What does it really mean to that your primary value is no longer being the smartest person in the room, but the person who's able to ask good questions, that can attract talent, that has
Mhm.
the humility to uh, create the space for others to grow, that sort of thing. That's a hard shift. I would say the other is um, getting over what I think of as status quo bias.
Hmm.
Uh, Or on the other hand, getting over overly participative bias. So new leaders come in, they don't want to look like micromanagers. So the tendency then is to be not as decisive as they need to be.
Mm.
And or they recognize that there are changes that need to happen, but they're afraid to break something.
Sure.
Because if they break something, then they have to fix it.
Mhm.
And that's scary. And so the tendency is uh, sort of operate with, well, I know it's not optimal, but I don't know what would happen if I made a change, so I'm not going to. So the choice is sometimes, do you want to die slow? Because you can always do that for a while. Or do you want to risk, it's possible that you might die fast because something happens. But the reality is, you also doom yourself to never being able to realize your aspirations for the organization if you're not willing to um, take risks that only the CEO can take sometimes.
Mhm.
So I think that recognition that you gotta break something, you gotta make it your own. You have to risk, upsetting people, but that's the only way that you have the impact that only you can have in the organization.
So how do you help people do that, Lee? How do you help people get over that challenge that's holding them back?
I think assessment is one way. When we show people assessments that say, here's what your tendency is likely to be. Let's talk about what it would look like if you would do something else. Another thing that I'll talk with people about sometimes is to say, okay, let's look at where you're at right now. Let's imagine that you were a 10% more bold risk taker than you are right now. What might you do? Let's imagine you were a 25% more bold risk maker. What would you do? Um, let's imagine that you were actually to do what you think the right thing to do is. What would you do? Um, which I think starts to get people to think differently.
Mm,
Um, and then there's a lot of talking about it and planning. It's a silly old joke about five frogs sitting on a log, and and one of the frogs says, "I'm going to jump into the lake." How many frogs are on the log? And there's still five until you execute.
mhm.
Uh, One of the things that happens is people say they're going to do something, but they can sit on that for a very long time. So it's the willingness to push. People will sometimes say, and it always surprises me, "Boy, you're scary." And it's like, I think I'm the least scary person in the world, but I do keep raising the question.
Mhm.
Um, wow, what's getting in the way? What's the consequence of that?
Mhm.
Um, I think also as I've done this work more, uh, I have become more opinionated. I'm more willing to say, uh, having worked with lots of other organizations, let me tell you what their experience has been.
Mhm.
Uh, which I think is a shift too. There's this shift of, it's not my job to give advice. It is my job to have a point of view.
Mhm.
And that's part of, uh, I think what helps, you know, I think part of, growth and change is helping people to see, what they're experiencing through a different lens. So you have to create a different lens so they can see it through a different lens and then start to realize, oh, there are possibilities I haven't considered before. So that's a big part of it.
I love that, and
Yeah.
how powerful it is for people to recognize, maybe start to question some of their own beliefs,
Right.
or
Right.
recognize there's another option out there, or
Right.
another way to do things.
Growth is about, I really like this idea. It comes from a guy from Harvard that says that we grow as our view of the world becomes more complex,
Mm,
as we're able to see the world and its complexities more fully, because the more complex our mind is, more options we have, the
mm,
more options we can see.
I love that.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about the value of partnering with someone when you're on this leadership development journey, whether it's a CEO advisor, an executive coach. You talked about it can help expand self-awareness, which can help us identify places where we get stuck. It can help create space outside of the organization to talk about things. What else is the value of executive coaching and CEO advising?
I think the best executive coaching relationships really become real partnerships. So we structure relationships where we say, we're going to meet twice a month on a scheduled basis. Um, but that really is just the start. I think really the best relationships are ones where the CEO is willing to partner with the coach in their growth and in the unresolved challenges that they have. So part of the challenge of being a CEO is you don't have any peers. You got the board that evaluates you. You've got direct reports, and if you have good boundaries, there's stuff you can't really talk about with the people that report to you. So where do you go for somebody where you can be as authentic as you want to be, and there's no real consequence for that? I think part of what a coach is a place to try out stuff, uh, and to get perspectives on that. It's also a place where you can share your doubts. You can share your sometimes pain about No matter what you do, there's no easy answer. I love when clients walk away saying, "Okay, I know what I'm going to do now, and I have the confidence to do it." Certainty and confidence. I think what the best coaching provides for leaders over time, or doesn't provide, it allows for leaders to come to a place of, "Okay, I'm going to do this. I have the certainty of what my next step is going to be, and I have the courage and confidence to do that." And that's what allows CEOs to act. They need that, and I think a coach can, who is we talk about just in time, right? The being available for uh, consultations between those sessions, and I often will just reach out to a CEO and say, "What's going on?" And they'll say, "If you got a little time just to chat about this issue," so you become a partner to the person that they can rely on, and that they know cares about them, not just as a client that cares about them as a human being. It's always been important to me to communicate the message. Um, to me, I care about you as a human being. You are on my mind between sessions, um, and I deeply care about you and your success.
Mm.
So that's a big part of it as well. Somebody who cares is huge. It's not uncommon for someone to say, "I'm sharing this with you. I've never shared it with anybody else, not even my significant other," because they need some place to be human.
Mm.
And I think coaching can provide that.
What an invaluable gift.
Back to it feels meaningful to make a difference in people's lives. It does.
Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing. All right, I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. All right, we're going to talk mistakes.
Mistakes? No.
What's a leadership mistake that you've made that's taught you something really valuable?
You know, uh, a couple things come to mind. One of the first thing that comes to my mind, I don't know if it's a leadership mistake or a coaching mistake, but I was coaching they're probably related. I was coaching this group of 3 partners, and they were in conflict, and they wanted me to come and mediate their conflict. It was pretty clear to me fairly early on that this was not a resolvable issue.
Mm.
They were going to ultimately have to, um, what? Let go of the partnership that they had, because there was somebody who was irreconcilably.
Mm.
So we went through the process, and ultimately what happened was, it broke up. And at the end of that, one of the 3 partners said, "Did you know that this was going to happen?" And, and when I reflected on it, I had to be honest and say, "Yeah, I kind of did." And she said, "Well, why didn't you tell us that?"
Mm.
Uh, and that was a really profound moment for me. Profound in the sense that it's important to really be honest with people. Uh, I've talked about this before. One of the people that I learned a lot from in my counseling program was a guy by the name of Carl Rogers, who talked about, why does therapy work? He did 30 years of experiments to try to figure out why, whether you use cognitive therapy or humanistic therapy or behavioral, when it works, it works. Why is that? And he said, uh, unconditional positive regard, so people feeling cared for and they know that they're cared for. Listening with empathy, so people feeling like somebody's really interested in understanding how the world looks through their eyes. But the third thing is congruence, and that's being honest on the outside with what you're experiencing on the inside, speaking that truth, if you will. And I realized I had failed the congruence test, if you will. And I think the times that I have made mistakes as a leader of the Bailey group have been when I have avoided congruence, when I have, I think about times when I have known that uh, it wasn't working anymore with somebody. It's always easier in the moment to avoid that hard conversation, to avoid that choice. But inevitably, just like the partnership with those 3 people broke up, inevitably, if it's not going to work, it's not going to work. And the learning for me has been having avoided some of those. And then the person themselves decides to make a choice. And now I'm in a reactive place to be willing to be congruent, even when that's hard, even when that's unknown, because it's going to happen anyway. And so the mistake, I think, is avoidance.
Why is that so hard? Why is it so hard to be congruent?
I've reflected on that question a lot. I think part of it is human nature. If you, and I don't claim to be a neuroscience expert, but the neuroscience is pretty clear that human beings seek to avoid threat and to move towards pleasure. So our brains are wired to avoid threat. So to move towards threat requires training yourself to do that. So that's part of it.
Interesting.
We all come from our own developmental experiences, and we all have our habitual ways of responding to threat, and often we don't even know we're in threat.
Yeah.
But there are really three ways that people respond to threats. Sometimes they move away, they just avoid. A lot of people do that. Sometimes people want to please and have people like them, so they just don't want to bring it up. Or sometimes people try to control the situation in indirect ways. But so we all have that. And if we don't know that about ourselves, that's why self-awareness is so important. Because really being able to overcome that requires knowing it about yourself, recognizing in yourself when you're doing that, and then the disciplined choice to do something different, which again is why coaching can be so valuable. It's hard to do that alone. It's hard without accountability to do that hard thing, because we're not wired to do that. That's just not how we're wired as human beings.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's an amazing example. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Maybe one more thing on that
Yeah.
too, which is just interesting, I think. So the best neuroscience says that what happens is we create neural pathways in our mind that causes us to act in habitual ways. And so again, to change this behavior, we actually have to create new neural pathways and to abandon old neural pathways. That's not easy work. That is hard work. That's the other reason why it's so hard.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And to your point, it all comes back to self-awareness.
Yeah, it does.
Seeing when we're in those old patterns that are no longer serving us.
And the motivation to go through the pain of changing that and the fear of changing that.
So Leigh, in all your years of working with leaders, what do you believe are the most critical skills for leaders to develop?
It's interesting. There's research that has a lot to say about that. And whether you use this assessment or this assessment, that sort of thing, the research is pretty consistent. You need to be, sometimes it's called achievement-oriented, sometimes it's about ambition, but what it's about is the desire to achieve challenging goals, and the willingness to challenge oneself to achieve challenging goals is really important. I think, and an inner directedness to do that, not needing to have somebody else, your own sort of internal drive to do that.
So in your experience, is that born? Is that nature or is that nurture?
I think it's both. I think some of it is about personality, but I think some of it also is about life experiences and what you observe, what's made you successful. But I do think a part of it is born too, in terms of, not that you can't overcome if that's not a natural thing, but I think there are some natural tendencies around that. I think the other thing or some other things, there's an assessment we use that talks about something called interpersonal sensitivity, the ability to read the impact that you have on other people. Um, the ability to empathize, to be able to see situations through somebody else's eyes and to communicate that,
Mhm.
I think is a really important skill for a leader. There has to be a balance between uh, openness to new experience and a desire and a need to try new things, because I think that's where strategy comes from,
Sure.
but a respect for process and a respect for clarity, which generally I think is what happens when you have a really good partnership between, for example, a CEO and a COO, or to use
Mm.
language from another model, a visionary and an integrator. But you need to have respect
Yeah.
for both of those, I think. I think self-awareness is really important. You need to have awareness when you're operating in a defensive way that's keeping you from hearing other points of
Mm.
view. I think that's really important. I think you have to have openness to other perspectives. You have to be what I like to call advisor receptive, and that
Mm.
could be an outside advisor. That could be uh, people inside the organization that have different points of view. I think you need to be curious and to love to learn, because the world changes so fast. Um, you have to have this interesting balance, I think, of boldness and humility.
Mm.
Uh, one of the things that's interesting, I think, about being a CEO in particular is that almost all of the decisions you make don't really have a right answer. The only way you can know if the answer is right is if you can teleport yourself 5 years into the future and see what happens, and you can't.
Yeah.
There's a distinction between bad decisions and unfortunate outcomes, and sometimes good decisions result in unfortunate outcomes because you can't anticipate. So there has to be a boldness to be willing to act on your experience and your instinct, if you will, having consulted others. And there has to be a humility to know that it might be that we need to revisit that decision because it didn't turn out the way I expected it to, and a willingness to make the choice, make the decision, and then risk having to make another decision or having people criticize. Because inevitably, too, no matter what decision you make, some people will like it and some people will not. And that there's no way out of that.
What do you see, uh it's a tricky balance between boldness and humility. What do you see tends to be a more naturally used strength where there's more opportunity for one over the other? I mean, through the CEOs you've worked with, do they tend to be more bold and they really need to work on their humility or vice versa?
Surprisingly, uh, many of the CEOs I work with, I think, need to be more bold.
Mm.
Now, that may be not a lack of humility, or that might not be over humility, but over cautious, if you
Mhm.
will. Um, Now, it could be too that the only CEOs that tend to choose to want to work with me um, tend to see the world in similar ways that I do. But I think most of the conversations I have with CEOs are, the answer here. Uh, you can maintain what's going on right now. You know what the outcome's going to be, or you can take the risk, um, knowing that that's uncertain, but you have no chance of changing the situation if you don't. That's the more common conversation.
Mm.
That's the most of the conversations. Um, and there's the board, there's the other members of the ELT, there's the organization, but again, there are certain decisions that only the CEO makes, and if the CEO doesn't make those decisions, the organization gets stuck,
Mm.
and that's the bigger risk, I think.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And that probably ties back to human nature's, uh, natural inclination to move away from threat.
Yeah, I think I see a lot. CEOs will walk right up to the edge of the cliff, they'll look over the cliff, they'll go, not so much," and then they'll walk back. Um, and I don't say that critically, I've done the same thing, because you realize human beings don't like uncertainty.
Right?
They like to know what the future is gonna be. They like to know their answer is gonna be turning out well. And most decisions you can.
Mm.
So it's hard.
So, Lee, as you look to the future, what leadership challenges do you think are coming next? You've got 3.5, almost 4 decades of experience, and my goodness, you've probably seen the world of leadership change dramatically over that time. What do you see coming?
One of the things that uh, I don't know if it's right to say I'm concerned about, but I think one of the important challenges, the world is changing a lot right now. Um, and I think a risk for CEOs, for organizations, for executives is trying to or having difficulty um, imagining what their organization might look like 5 to 7 years from now. The tendency is to just imagine it's going to sort of look the same, just a little bit bigger. And the practical reality is, I think that's not the case. And again, your choice is, do you want to choose where you think you want to go? Or do you want to just be in a reactive mode and react? And I think back to our human fear of being fearful of being choiceful and the need to have our imagination prompted, I think one of the challenges will be, can we envision where we want to go? Again, recognizing I might be wrong. I might have to change that. That's why strategic planning is a repetitive process, if you will. I think the other challenge is, uh, it's really interesting. One of the big neuroscience consultancy firms has now just, uh, and you can do this, by the way. Go to ChatGPT. You can clone yourself and make yourself into an online AI consultant. And so now they're saying, gee, you can have the smartest coach in the world at your fingertips. Uh, I think the reality is motivating and engaging smart people is becoming increasingly difficult. When I started my career, the respect for authority was very different than it is today. The motivation to work was very different than, and I'm not criticizing. It was just very different. And you could get away with uh, not caring very much about back to the career development and the
Mhm.
engagement stuff because, hey, uh, you're lucky to have a job, and that was the mindset, if you will. Today, in a world where uh, differentiation happens by engaging and retaining bright people, the ability to do that, I think, is
Mm.
what's going to differentiate organizations. And I'm quite certain that leaders need help with that. Again, most leaders become leaders because of their technical competence,
Sure.
not so much because of their innate ability to lead and engage and connect and all those sorts of things. And I think and again, it's interesting. I think we used to think of that as either or. And if you're a student of old management theory, they used to talk about theory X or theory Y. You're either one. And the reality is, effective leaders today need to be more versatile than ever. They have to be able to recognize when they need to be forceful. They have to recognize when they need to be more empowering. They have to be able to bring both sets of skills to the table. And that's a huge human challenge to be able to do both. And I think that's where the challenge will be in the future, to engage really bright people to do meaningful work on behalf of your organization.
So, what's some actionable advice you would give to professionals out there who want to be more effective leaders? How can they do that?
The first thing I would say is uh, you have to be a learner. And different people do that differently, whether you're a reader, whether you're a podcast listener to, whether you're whatever. Um, because you need new lenses through which to see the problems. And I think the curiosity to be learning all the time gives you new lenses to think about how you approach things. I think working with a coach or working with a therapist, either way is important because the sophistication of self-awareness and relationship awareness you need to have today is so much different than it was 20 years ago,
Right.
30 years ago. And a good therapist or a good coach who can reflect back to you
Mm-hmm.
what self-awareness, number one, and number two, it's interesting. I do lots of team development with executive teams. And one of the things that we do a lot of is modeling what does it look like to have a good conversation. So I had a session yesterday with a client. It was like several times we stopped, says, paraphrase back what you just heard before you argue with them.
Mm.
Or, yeah, ask 2 questions before you proceed. And people go, I never thought about that before. And it's awkward. Similar situation not very long ago, and this really powerful ELT guy, and I said to him, stop, paraphrase. And he said, you're criticizing me, aren't you? I was like, well, no, but I'm telling you that there's a better way to do that.
Yes.
And it's worth trying
Yes.
because it's a skill you can build.
Yes.
So I think being willing to confront that, being willing to see what it looks like to have that model. There are lots of bad therapists, but there are some good ones that can help with that. And I think really good coaches can help with that.
That's exceptional. Give folks some advice on how to select a coach. How does one go about finding the right fit for them?
So one of the things that annoys me, I'll be honest, is the idea that, a good coach is somebody that you really relate to well. And that's what you should really do. No, I think what you need to look for is a coach that's trained. And training can come through counseling training and, through academic work. It can come through coaches training, but somebody who really is skilled and has training in one-on-one work, somebody who can translate those concepts into the world of business. One of the things that I learned relatively early on was that people didn't care how smart I was. It's kind of cool to be able to quote Carl Rogers or quote whatever. But they look at me like, yeah, okay, get on with it. They didn't care. But you have to know that so that you can then be present to the issues.
Sure.
And then you have to understand the world of the client well enough that you can translate that into the world of the client. So you need somebody, so you should be looking for somebody who authentically has experience in the business world, who can talk your language, who seems interested in you. So there are 2 ways that I think coaches can intentionally or unintentionally do harm. One is to have lots of book knowledge, but really not understand how that translates into what a client needs. The other is someone who says, yeah, all that stuff doesn't matter. Just do it the way I do it. If you just do it the way I do it, then you'll be fine. Or be like me. I'm cool, so be like me, and then you'll be good. Run when either one of those is the case. You need somebody who has the humility to learn from you, just like they are, or you are learning from them. You need someone who invests in you. You need someone who knows the language of your business. You need someone who who demonstrates an understanding of the complexity of your world and can be present with you in that complexity.
Deeply empathetic.
Yeah.
Really well said.
Exactly.
Thank you, Leigh.
Yeah.
Leigh, thank you so much for joining me today.
You.
Your insights, wisdom, and presence are a gift not just to the listeners, but also to everyone who's had the opportunity and privilege of working with you. Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Leadership Matters. If today's episode resonated with you, would you do me a favor and share it with someone you care about? To learn more about the work the Bailey Group is doing in the world, check us out at thebaileygroup.com or follow us over on LinkedIn. We love sharing useful articles, helpful resources, and valuable tools to help you expand your leadership capacity. Like and subscribe, and join us next time for more honest conversations.